measuring, on identifying the specific kinds of things that we've done with companies. And this is since 1993. Much of that impact, by the way, has been in place since 2003, when we first started our program with NIH, but it went on for 18 years, as I mentioned yesterday as well. The SBR STTR program, also referred to as America's Seed Fund, it is the largest high-risk, high-impact, publicly funded program in the world. Almost all the federal agencies that have a science focus of any kind ascribe to the program, which is effectively a tax on their R&D budget. Some of them are quite small. NOAA is actually quite small compared to some of the other agencies, but very focused on specific areas, obviously, of their own mission. NIH, for example, has 27 institutes that range across the entire spectrum of healthcare and life sciences. Similarly, DOE has a tremendous R&D budget that cuts across a whole range of areas, etc. NOAA is very focused on atmosphere, environment, oceans, and obviously one of the things that they're very involved in now with the whole issue of sustainability, the increase in carbon emissions, the increase in activities around weather and climate. NOAA's role becomes far more central than it may have been in years past. The other change in NOAA's program is that they've gone from being a contracting agency where all of the grants that they made were actually contracts for the companies to work with them, to being much more of an open market program where the companies actually don't have NOAA as their principal and primary focus, but rather the marketplace as a whole. That's an incredible change, and one that I think is going to be extremely important as we move forward on fostering innovations for sustainability. These are the federal agencies we've been involved with, and they generally take the form of a commercialization assistance program to help grantees move towards a sustainable innovation and keep themselves going as sustainable enterprises. The process is an inverted funnel. As you can see, we go all the way from idea, which is phase 0 in many cases, and even when there's no formal phase 0 program, we inevitably end up engaged with companies throughout their life cycle, starting very early before they even have a grant, moving all the way to the right-hand side of the funnel, which obviously is going to be smaller because a lot of companies drop out or don't necessarily survive. In fact, the survival statistics, you all know, for small businesses is extremely low. So it's something to keep in mind. Our focus is on trying to maintain their sustainability as enterprises. A quick note here on what we end up doing. We've got sort of two big buckets: the incubator and accelerator programs that feed our thought leadership and our investment thesis. Larta is going to be developing, and I said this in the first day, I said this yesterday as well, an internal catalytic fund that takes catalytic capital from philanthropy, from foundations, from family offices, from individuals, and uses that catalytic capital to invest and fund companies who may not have the ability to stand up to conventional external capital. Remember, this is the worst year we've had in 35 years for private capital to be raised by companies. The only people writing checks, as a venture capital said to me 2 days ago, the only people writing checks are corporates. And for the corporations, there are 3 reasons why they would invest. Number 1, specifically to advance their own ability to deal with certain things that they may not have in-house as they seek to reduce or to streamline their R&D budgets. Number 2, to hedge against regulatory risk downstream. And we've seen that in the case of many of the fossil fuel and other companies. And number 3, because they really do have, and this is not a cynical point, they really do have either a commitment to or a need to acknowledge the whole issue of sustainability. At least in the areas that we focus on, We think that that is going to be an important thesis to keep in mind and an important set of partners to have in place. Capital itself is changing. Much more involvement by foundations and philanthropy, as we have discovered here in Los Angeles and the West Coast in general, but also in the Midwest and in the Northeast. There's a considerable appetite that's growing for foundations to be engaged with investment in or funding in small innovative companies. The problem is that for them to do so is much more difficult, and so intermediaries like Larta become extremely important, because we're not just conduits of money, we're intelligent intermediaries that focus on reducing risk, on increasing viability, and on extending influence and value by the companies. So that catalytic capital fund is going to be an important investment objective that we have over the next year. Yesterday, we went through a whole set of innovations that are focused on community impact, particularly in two areas: healthcare and life sciences innovations that seek to ameliorate the issues of healthcare inequity and increase the opportunities for healthcare innovations that are in fact extant and available in regions like this, with such incredible institutions: Cedars-Sinai, UCLA, USC, Caltech, Huntington Memorial. In total, by the way, just so everybody knows, the universities in the Los Angeles area have the largest share, for example, of NIH funding. The largest in the country is Johns Hopkins. But if you talk about the institutions here, every one of them is right up there. And the problem is there is a disconnect between the innovations that are available in these institutions and the needs of communities that have otherwise been historically marginalized or forgotten. And we can't afford that. We cannot afford that as a society. We certainly cannot afford that as the most diverse place on the planet, the gene pool of the world, as I call Los Angeles. So Heal.LA, our program that we presented yesterday with innovations in the cohort that has currently gone through the program, are all focused on that. And the second part of that was entrepreneurs versus climate change, where we select entrepreneurs either from those communities that are most impacted by climate change or who have innovations that will effectively address the effects of climate change. And that's innovation through a community-focused lens. Sorry, I should have gone through the entire thing here. So we're leveraging, obviously, government and philanthropic funding. The program, the Venture Fellows program, is funded by the Wells Fargo Foundation for the most part, and we've got some support from other folks, including locally here, our utilities, who were in here yesterday, looking at all of the innovations that happen. Edison and Southern California Gas and DWP, very large utilities. The Heal.LA program, this is an area where government has been very directly involved, the Small Business Administration, nominating us as a cluster for the life sciences in the Los Angeles region, and the California Office of Small Business Advocate and the Governor's Office of Business for the Heal.LA program as well. Obviously, we are incredibly interested, and we'll have a presentation here at 10:30 on on what we've pulled together by way of research on the climate, on COP, on the innovations around climate and the environment, and some obvious mandates that we think we need to be able to get behind. But I don't have to tell you, the 1.5 degrees centigrade target is coming sooner than anticipated. I believe that COP is already suggesting that it's in the rearview mirror and that we should not be looking at it seriously anymore, because I don't think we're going to be able to get there. That's a little bit of pessimism, but it's tempered by a whole range of other things that have been done at COP, which we will talk about at 10:30, including the methane reduction agreements that they came to. So I won't dwell on the Ocean Climate Nexus right now. Certainly you're going to hear from Jeff Dilley in a little bit, and he's going to pursue some of these kinds of themes broadly speaking. Suffice it to say that we're absolutely committed to innovations that focus on these areas: greenhouse gases, ocean acidification, and the impact of all of these on communities. So, for example, coastal resilience, which is one of NOAA's areas, is an incredibly important piece for us to be able to continue to work towards. We need comprehensive and synchronized global policies. That is clear. COP makes that even clearer, because it's very difficult to do, by the way, and we know that very well. We need scalable, cost-effective, proven innovation that has been de-risked at a local level and can be scaled up. We need the adoption and deployment of impactful innovation, and that is, I know, not always an easy term to define. Impact is often seen in the eyes of the beholder. We've got to find frameworks and ways to be able to measure it in a very clear and specific way. And we've got to look at capital for innovation deployment. I've spoken the last couple of days about the capital stack. The capital stack currently is stacked against, frankly, small innovative companies. And that is why Larta is so anxious and committed to the notion of bringing in other forms of capital and pulling them together as part of one approach. These are some challenges that we're going to be looking at increasingly as part of our own approach to sustainability, whether it's through the venture fellows or otherwise. We're certainly broadening and trying out different things. The near-term opportunities that I wanted to be able to simply point to before I end is the marine carbon dioxide removal programs that are currently being considered or are already in place. The coastal and climate resilience accelerators that, for example, NOAA is currently pursuing and developing, climate smart commodities, and the monitoring of methane. It's interesting to note that at COP, the methane reduction issues have become front and center very early in the discussions at COP, which is a great thing, by the way. I think it really is an important thing. You've heard this before, but the policy and funding issues, I cannot overestimate the impact of the Inflation Reduction Act. The problem is we've got to make sure that it doesn't just go to incumbents because it's risky otherwise to go to other things, right? The immediate choice is to be able to go, oh, let's go to the incumbents that are there, that are well organized, that are big. We will not get to the point of being able to try out some interesting high-risk things and high-impact things if we don't have other ways of being able to make that funding available. And of course, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, a really remarkable set of things going on around the country, and you can see that here in Southern California as well. SBIR, this is America's Seed Fund. There's an increasing focus across the board on commercialization. We know that with the relationships we currently have with federal agencies, not just in the formal way as part of the contracts that we have with the agencies, but also with what they call TABA, the Technical Assistance and Business Assistance area of the SBIR, which is entirely focused on companies' choices and what they want to be able to do. Increasingly, the focus is on commercialization, which is a good thing. We are looking also at the ability, we've spoken to folks at NOAA as well about this, the interoperability issue of data, because there are so many data standards in place and so much proprietary data that I think we need to start working towards a standard of care that is going to be maintained neutrally by an agency that can have some kind of opportunity to share that data across the board. This is easier said than done, by the way. I know that was a very simplistic statement, but it's something that I think we're going to have to do. Dr. Spinrad at NOAA recognizes this very, very well, as does Dr. Kapanik. She may, in the clip that we have, she may refer to that, but I know that they are committed to having this kind of standard data commons. It's a hard thing to do, really hard to do, particularly when you have all of the interests associated with maintaining data in a silo. There's examples here of private investment in this ocean climate nexus that I think we need to be able to pay attention to, because these have become big issues, even in large forums like COP and smaller forums that are occurring across the country. Obviously, energy is one of them, and I think the increasing opportunity for federal agencies to work with each other is important. That doesn't happen, by the way. It's not a criticism, it's a matter of fact. They do not work together as well as they should. They are still in silos of influence, of impact, of research, of all of the other things that they do. So there is an opportunity here for increasing the interagency nexus. Shipping, a big thing going on there around the world, by the way. There's some really amazing organizations like the American Bureau of Shipping, which is a standard-setting body based on the Gulf Coast. There's a number of other wonderful groups like Blue Sky Maritime and so on. MCDR, our friends at Ocean Visions, we're part of that group. We're part of the leadership of Ocean Visions. Remarkable group that brings together people like, for example, Woods Hole, a number of other research organizations, some very specific thought leadership, and some push towards, in particular, marine CDR. Conservation and remediation, this is part of our thesis as well on nature preservation and repair that I presented the day before yesterday. Food production, obviously USDA and NOAA because of its focus on aquaculture as well. USDA because of its focus on aquaculture as well. Again, opportunities for the agencies to collaborate actively. And then monitoring. And on the atmosphere side, you've heard about direct carbon capture. You've heard about carbon capture in general. Carbon capture, utilization, and storage under one big, large umbrella. And there's a number of things under that. We'll talk about that at 10:30. Biomass use and reuse. This is both terrestrial, frankly, and also terrestrial to ocean. We'll talk about that in a second. Renewable energy. And of course, you are all aware of the mandates that are happening on renewable energy and this 5 steps back that have been taken in many places, including, for example, Florida and here in California, where solar, which was much easier to get before, is now suddenly become a major problem for renters and homeowners because they don't get the same kinds of incentives because the utilities pushed back to some extent, not all, to some extent. And then, of course, the monitoring of that whole thing.